Is Ezola Foster.
Thank you. Quite an introduction. Thank you. Thank you very much. And greetings from the city of Lost Angels. That's Los Angeles. They are lost there. Believe me, we're very lost because we are the ones that start all of these programs. And like the tentacles of an octopus, it spreads all over America. I want to talk with you about what's happening in the public schools there. And if it's not happening in your schools yet, believe me, it's on its way. Just to sort of bring you up to date as to how I got started in all of this, I first of all was born in Louisiana, small town. I'm going to come back to that in a moment because I do have a story to tell you about what's happening there today that I think you'll be interested in. I grew up in Houston, Texas, and after finishing school, college, I then went to Los Angeles. After working for about a year and a half in a law office there, a law firm, I then went into teaching. And this was the beginning of a drastic change in my life because I was assigned to a school in the community of Watts, a high school there. This was in 1963. By the way, I've been teaching 33 years and probably would still be there if I hadn't gotten run out of there last year. But after the 1965 riots and the McCone Commission found that the quality of education was so poor and contributed to the riots, money just poured into the community from the government. What happened? The gangsters who were throwing the firebombs formed themselves into a group called the Sons of Watts. And then they got a lot of government funding. One parent who was very active in the rioting, who was pictured in the Los Angeles Times with a fan, which was all she had left from her looting days, formed an organization called Parents of Watts, and her organization began to speak for all of the parents in the community. Thus came the grip, the chokehold on the black community, because from Watts it spread across America. Now we hear a lot about conspiracy. I'm going to talk to you about a different conspiracy, and one that I hope that you can see as clearly as I have experienced. During the 1960s, at the peak of the political black movements, the Chicano movement, feminist movement, homosexual movement, all of these groups have come together, and throughout the years and even today, they have coalesced. And all of them speak as one on all of the issues which most of us are on the opposite side of. Now, let me give you an example of what I'm speaking of when I say this. You've heard of Ebonics. Well, black English was introduced in the schools in Los Angeles in the early 60s. It didn't catch on, so it wasn't until Ebonics that people realized it was actually being taught. Why is that? You have the homosexual movement that now is in every school in the Los Angeles Unified School District through what's called Project 10. Project 10 is a homosexual recruitment program in our public schools. It came about in the 1970s. A lesbian counselor from one of the high schools had been entrusted with one of the young girls for a weekend competition, had an affair with the girl, and then decided that 10% of our students were homosexual, and so thus was born Project 10. After that, we had what was called Homosexual Pride Month, in which the schools devoted the entire month to homosexual activities. Following that, we had Coming Out Day. This is a day in which teachers who are homosexuals will stand before their classes, kindergarten through 12th grade, and talk about their lifestyle and bring in their mate with them to discuss how they live and how wonderful homosexuality is. Now, many people get upset with me when I talk about snake oil preachers. Americans for Family Values, when we learned what was happening, and by me having the privilege of knowing the information is coming out, we contacted leading black ministers in the community. Some you see on TV every Sunday. Depending upon what religious station you watch, you probably see them during the week also. And we said to them, stand with us and let's stop this nonsense. We couldn't get a one. Even though we told them all we need would be 2, 3, few members of your congregation, we could do it. It never happened. And so that is why the movement, homosexual movement, has grown so big in the Los Angeles School District, which is the second largest in America, by the way. Now, these same ministers will hold a press conference and stand up for accused child molester Michael Jackson. They will hold a press conference and stand up for convicted rapist Mike Tyson, but they will not stand at a press conference and say that this is wrong to teach our children. Interestingly enough, they've heard me say this, what I'm saying to you, many, many times. And because I've become very, very active with some of our local elected officials there, they did hold a press conference 2 weeks ago. I was told 100 black ministers, to speak out against 3 bills that are now pending in our state assembly, which would legitimize homosexuality not only in our public schools, but in every public arena. And Christian schools and Christian churches would violate the law if they spoke out against homosexuality. Now, 100 clergymen, you would think that would be all over the media. I know how to call press conferences. I've called several, and we've gotten a lot of media attention. I had a friend who attended this press conference, and I asked him, why weren't you on the news? With 100 ministers, I would think that that would have made the news. He said, well, when the media got there, some of the pastors were standing outside, some were inside. Evidently, they were doing something else because it didn't seem, excuse me, that a press conference was going on at all. And so the media, we talk about the media, we criticize the media, but let me tell you, if you have an organized press conference and they come, you'll get coverage. We know that. But the media was smart enough, they were smart enough to see that there was no sincerity there. The issue of immigration, that may not be a big issue for you here, but in California, we're being invaded. Over 2,000 every month come in. There is no reason that our public schools would be overcrowded were it not for illegal immigration. And what happens is that our own children are being treated as second-class citizens. For example, our children in the state of California, American citizen children, will not be allowed to enroll without their immunizations and a birth certificate. I had some parents who moved to Los Angeles from Louisiana, and when they tried to enroll their children, they didn't have the birth certificate. They were told they had to get it, and their children had to sit out of school until they were able to get it. Illegals will come in, and they don't have a birth certificate. Word of mouth is taken, and they are immediately enrolled. If they cannot afford immunization, the school will pay for it. Now, many, many parents, minorities, and in fact, a large percentage of blacks voted for Proposition 187 against the wishes of the black leadership. The reason is these parents know, they feel the hurt. They see what's happening to their children. In the projects where many of the students come from, in the schools where I have taught, they see public housing accommodations for people who have just arrived. and yet our own citizens are standing in line, senior citizens especially, waiting to get in. And that is why I was so upset when Jack Kemp had the nerve to call those of us who supported 187 bigots, when he, in fact, as the congressman over HUD, allowed illegals to move in to public housing, knowing that we had lists of all our own American citizens waiting. For those of you who don't understand how illegal immigration works, I'll put it to you very simply. It's the same as if two people go to work every day to feed and clothe their two children at home. But every time they return home from work, there's another mouth to feed. After a while, that's going to be an overcrowded household and not enough money, and it will collapse. That is what's happening to California. We were going to declare bankruptcy, our health department there, last year or so, until the Billary administration decided to come and give us some money. Yeah, the Billarys. So this is a problem for us. And again, you may not see it yet, but it's coming. Bilingual education. That is one of the biggest funding, the biggest gold pot of educational funding there is. And for those of you who wonder what was all the fuss about this Ebonics, money. Because black teachers and black children were the only minority who were not getting this funding. So what did our illustrious black leaders decide? Well, our children are African and they speak Ebonics, so they're foreign too. We want some of that money. I was state co-chair along with Senator Ray Haynes from California to try and stop funding for this nonsensical program. But of course, with the elected black officials we have, we did not win that battle. And so they did get funding for it, and they are further dumbing down our children. The rise of 65 resulted in the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. It is that act that has allowed for all of the other programs that we are now financing, the food programs. And that food, feeding our children, that sounds good to a lot of people. Wrong thing to do. I talk in my book how when it first started, the students would just really throw the food all over the place. They were insulted. Most of them even did not want people to know that they were on welfare, and certainly did not want people to know that they were being fed at school, because at that time it was not for their entire school. Today, every school that's considered minority, every school, every student in those schools apply for the food stamp program or the lunch program. They're getting so many food stamps, lunch, it's hard to keep up with them. But what has happened is our schools have become socialist training camps. Not only do we feed them, but now we have in our schools what's called Healthy Start, where we bring in all the social services that could possibly invade their young lives and their families' privacy, and get them enrolled in as many of these social service programs as possible. Just last week, the first high school there opened with a full-time doctor and 2 full-time nurses, so that your children don't even have to tell you they have a headache. They don't even have to tell you they have a tummy ache. They don't have to tell you they're sick at all. The school will take care of the problem. Not to mention the abortions and the abortion referrals and the condom giveaways. And by the way, one of these prominent black ministers I was talking about distributes condoms from his pulpit on Sundays. That's just how ridiculous this whole thing has come. You know, when I hear about conspiracy, the fact that a conspiracy is defined as 2 or more people working together in secret for an evil deed, these are the organizations I just talked about, but particularly the black organizations, the NAACP, the Urban League, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Calypso Lewis, Nation of Islam, the Reverend Ain't Jesse Jackson, Murky Waters and the Congressional Black Caucus, all of them work together. You think I'm kidding? Name me one issue on which they have not all stood together, where they have opposed each other. A couple of years ago, if that long, on C-SPAN, I believe it was, one of the national shows, they all came in solidarity to show support for each other. Where if they had been bigger and in the past, they wanted everyone to know they are one now. You know, this really bothers me because our young children are the ones that are being used as political pawns. And what hurts me most of all, the very group of people who were brought to America as slaves are being used to enslave all of America today. And being a member of that group, it breaks my heart. I have seen it. Now, I get in a lot of trouble with some of my so-called conservative black friends. Well, I get in trouble with all of my liberal black friends, but especially my conservative black friends, on the issue of African Americans, on the issue of reparations, and of course, on the sovereignty of this nation, immigration, and many of the other issues. But particularly African American, it bothers them that I am so adamantly opposed to this designation. And I tell you why. I grew up as a Negro. I don't remember going from colored to Negro. It just happened. All I know is growing up during the 40s and the 50s, I was a Negro. Didn't bother us because what was the definition of a Negro? One whose ancestors were brought to America as slaves from Africa. Blunt to the point. That's it. Then, as I was leaving college in 1960, we underwent another name change. No more Negro stuff. We're black. Black Americans. Well, many of us, especially those of college age, didn't think too much of it. You know, it sounded good to us. We're all going to try to get more blacks elected, and we're going to improve, get more freedom. So it sounded good. Not that we were asked if we wanted a name change, but I don't know if it would have mattered if it didn't sound good. We were stuck with it. And then when the media decided to cover the fight against apartheid in South Africa, the Reverend Ain't Jackson called a press conference and told the media, from now on, you refer to us as African American. There came another name change, and it has been with us ever since. The purpose for that name change was that so all blacks, Negroes, colored would goose step to the African National Congress. And it worked. It worked. During my debates on Proposition 187, I debated members of the NAACP and the Urban League. And the underlying message from them was that since most of the people in California were coming across from Mexico, and that they are people of color, and people of color may stick together, watch out. Next name change on the horizon, people of color. And they didn't like colored people, but people of color seems the way to go now. And that's the next name change. And if that's not bad enough, they did an editorial in major newspapers across the country saying whites may as well call themselves Euro-Americans because we're not getting rid of hyphenated Americans. So I'm not very popular with this group and with many others because of that reason. I think it's a sin and a shame because our young black children do not even know that Africa is the continent. What country are they being told to pledge allegiance to? And they are being told to pledge allegiance to the African continent. You would be hard-pressed to find an American flag in most of our classrooms there in Los Angeles, particularly in the inner city. And I have to tell you something about this designation, inner city, at risk, poverty. I was so glad and thank God that as I was growing up very poor, that no one told me I was at risk or that I was impoverished. Those kind of euphemisms, there's a reason for that. And whenever I talk about that, I think of, when we talk about euphemisms, I think about the time that Winston Churchill came to America and a luncheon buffet was given in his honor, at which fried chicken was served. He went for a second helping and he asked, "Could I have a breast?" And the hostess said, "Oh no, Mr. Churchill. In America, we say either white meat or dark meat." So the next morning, Mr. Churchill sent his hostess a beautiful corsage with the note, "I'd be much obliged if you pinned this to your white meat." Excuse me. You know, but why do we have these euphemisms? Again, it brings in more money and more power to those in the leadership role. You have seen, if you saw the Million Man March in Washington, you have seen the red, green, and black flag that flew high in our nation's capital. I was interviewed during that march on CNN. Leon Harris was live from the Capitol, and I was sitting in the studios in Los Angeles waiting for the interview, and he interviewed a Crip and a Blood, two of the notorious gangs from the area. They got their start in Watts at the school in which I was teaching. I saw how that happened too. I won't go into details about that, but believe me, I know who they are and how they got started. At any rate, they were there with their caps with the uprising, the coming war, and the book they had written about the revolution next time. And they made the statement to Leon, "The reason that we did what we did to our community is because of lack of leadership. And that's why we're here for Minister Farrakhan." Well, I tell you, smoke was coming out of my ears. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And so when Leon came to me, he said to me, "Well, Miss Foster, what do you think about the march?" And I said, "Well, Leon, first I want to tell you what I think about the comment those two just made. What they did to the community, Leon, they beat up our children who were on their way and from school trying to get a good education. They have maimed and killed innocent children, some sitting in their living rooms watching television. They have terrorized our community to the point that it became known as the killing fields. This is Beirut, USA, the war zone." And talk about leadership, Leon. Let's look at who the leaders were as these little gangsters grew to the power that they have today. The most powerful politician in the state of California at the time, Willie Brown. Some say he was even more powerful than the governor, black. Their congressperson, Augustus Hawkins at the time, black. Their state assemblywoman at the time was Murky Waters. Maxine, if you don't know who I'm talking about. Their state senator, black. Their mayor, Tom Bradley, black. There was a city councilman that had been on so long he was called the Emperor, black. Now with that leadership, and folks, Watts in South Central Los Angeles is not that large an area. It should have been the beacon light for communities, black communities across the nation, because here you had the most powerful leaders in the country in control. We should have had the safest schools, but they were the most dangerous. We should have had the safest streets. Children weren't in by 3 o'clock in the afternoon when the gangs started their activities. They were in trouble. Parents couldn't even send their children to the store after 3 in the afternoon. It's not that they lacked leadership, Leon. It was the wrong kind of leadership. Well, by the time I got home that evening after leaving the studio, I had a message on my machine. They love to call me little sister. Little sister, we just want you to know we heard your remarks today against our Minister Farrakhan. And you are going to be the first necklacing case in America if you don't keep your mouth shut. Now, for those of you who don't know what necklacing is, you may recall during the media coverage in South Africa, when an ANC comrade was slain, you would see thousands of blacks marching behind the coffin. Well, in 1976, young blacks were taken from the shanty towns to PLO training camps. They were trained there and then brought back to South Africa to terrorize the people the same way that people in Watson, South Central Los Angeles are being terrorized. And what these gangsters would do, when it was time for the funeral, they would go in and make all of the neighbors in the community come out to go to this funeral. If a neighbor refused, they were then taken before all of their other neighbors who encircled them. Their hands were tied behind them. An automobile tie filled with gasoline was placed around their neck, that was the necklace, set afire, and once the fire started burning, there was no stopping it as the rubber would melt into the skin. And this is how they forced the numbers that you saw behind those coffins. You may remember Winnie Mandela came here and said, with the necklace, we will liberate South Africa. Now, I don't know about you, but I would be deathly afraid of that kind of leadership. That is what's happening in our communities, and that is what's happening in our schools. We have those red, black, green flags. They're called African American flags, by the way. We have those flying in our classrooms. Martin Luther King's birthday has been turned into a festivity of showing just how hateful and racist America is. And every assembly in just about every school, every February, there's fighting between blacks and Latinos because they compete with each other. That's your multiculturalism that you hear so much about. Because February, it's Black History Month, and then April and May, well, I think they're about to really take over most of the year, but in May there's this big Cinco de Mayo celebration, and so the kids compete. Who's getting the most attention during this time? Now, mind you, these children cannot read above a third grade level, and they're in high school. But they know how to fight about those kind of things. They also know all about sex. What they don't see in these pornographic television shows and sitcoms, they get in school. You hear a lot about AIDS education. I can tell you about AIDS education. Believe me, I can tell you about it. I went to jail for it, so I can tell you about it. The Republican Party was having a convention in 1987, California Party Convention. Now, I had switched parties. You know, growing up in the South, I didn't even know anything about conservatives versus liberals, Democrats versus Republicans. All I knew is that every election for president, our parents always talked about voting for a Democrat. So it was just natural that as soon as I could sign up to vote, at that time it was age 21, I signed up as a Democrat. I was very active in the Democrat Party. In fact, I even got a plaque where I helped to elect Mayor Bradley, so I was very active in the party. But then I realized that the Democrat Party did not represent my values. I have a strong belief in my God. I have a strong belief in America. I believe in the traditional family, and I felt deserted, so I switched parties. Shortly thereafter, I became so active that I formed, as you heard, I don't know if he mentioned it earlier, but I formed a California Republican Assembly, which is a very conservative group in California, first one for blacks. We became very active. I became the first black to appear on the ballot, first black female to appear on the ballot as a Republican candidate for the state assembly. And so I thought, well, gee, now I'm a delegate to the party. I have a little clock, so I'm going to introduce some resolutions to the party. Big mistake, thinking this was a family party. The 3 resolutions, one had to do with AIDS brochures that were being sent to parents who would call the hotline, AIDS hotline, and they want information to teach their children about AIDS. And they would get this little pamphlet, which was being paid for by California taxpayers. And the pamphlet talked about safe versus unsafe sex. And when they described unsafe sex, believe me, what they were telling our children, many of you, I know, I would never have dreamed of as a sex act. And that's going on in our education, AIDS education class in our schools. The other resolution was to get rid of those, we had pornographic 976, I think it was called at the time. Those two resolutions just flew by, there were no problems. But the third resolution was to ask that the party not grant party credentials to people on the basis of their sexual orientation. Well, there's a group in the Republican Party called the Log Cabin Club. The Democrat is called the Stonewall Democrat. So the Log Cabin Club saw to it that I was actually arrested so that I could not lobby the group, because what I had done, I organized a group of Christian ladies from South Central, and here we had a busload of them come in, and we were asking, we were in front of the hotel with our little signs, we want a party of the family, are you going to be with the family, all the perverts, and we were just walking around with our signs. And then afterwards, we put the signs down, and we were in front of the hotel. We put the signs down, and then we came together in prayer, and then we walked in, and there we were met by the hotel security, who did not want me to go up to the mezzanine where the convention was going on. But I went up anyway, and as all of them were running after me, along comes the media, and as I'm standing there, well, you can't keep me from doing this, I'm a delegate, and I'm this, and before I knew it, a policeman, a real policeman, not security, had grabbed me from behind, picked me up, and just carted me off to jail, and so they kept me there all day, and that prevented us from getting that resolution passed. The funny thing was, my little group of Christian ladies were petrified. It was the first time they had ever involved themselves in politics, and they just couldn't believe it. They got on that bus and hightailed it back to South Central, and all they could do was say, Ezola, we'll pray for you, but we're not getting back into that fight. So it was, and to show you just how deep this is, talk about a conspiracy. The state Department of Transportation that gave the license to this company, it was a black bus company, and he really did us a favor, even though we paid him, wasn't as much. They threatened him to the point that he wouldn't even sell us the bus trip after that, because they were going to pull his license. It's not easy to speak out. Believe me, it isn't. A lot of people ask, well, you know, we know that there are a lot of decent, wonderful black people. Why aren't more of them speaking out? Well, it goes back to what I just said to you. They're terrorized in their own community. If you watch the O.J. Simpson trial, the closing argument by Johnny Cochran, you will remember what he said to those jurors. Remember, you have to go back to your community. Now, most people may not have known what that meant, but the jurors knew what it meant. And those of us who live in the community, we knew what it meant. So when I talk about this conspiracy, locally, not internationally, but locally, that is what I am talking about, and we feel it. You see the results of it, but we actually feel it in the community, and our children are suffering because of it. On top of all that, we also have the United Nations that's acting as an international school board with all of these detrimental policies, all designed to destroy family life and Christianity as we know it in America. And so I certainly was just thrilled to death when I found out about the John Birch Society. And whenever I see "Get Us Out of the UN," I honk my horn, yes. We don't normally put stickers on our car, but that was the only one our husband would allow on there. And we get a lot of comments about that. But, you know, we talk about outcome-based education, and we talk about Goals 2000. Let me tell you exactly what that translates to in the classroom. If Johnny does not know that 2 plus 2 equals 4, and he tells you it's 5, as the teacher, you're not to correct him because you destroy his self-esteem. Somehow Johnny's got to figure that out before he graduates. And if he wants to graduate, they're going to do away with grading altogether. No such thing as A, B, C. We don't want any competition. We don't want just one person sitting here with a dunce cap on his head, as was illustrated in the New American. We want all the kids with it on. So they're all equal. They've made a mockery of the equality that blacks have striven for so many years. They've made a mockery of it, just as mockery is being made of our United States Constitution today by elected officials. Outcome-based education, Goals 2000, values clarification, all of these great sounding names. There's a reason our children are not being taught to read. Because those who hate America aren't interested in burning the books. They don't have to. The children won't be able to read them. Why teach them to read? We will tell them what we want them to know. We had porn on the internet. Big discussion about that when Congress entertained the bill. And I remember one of the congressmen made the statement, well, you know, we have to try to balance. We want to be concerned with the children, but pornographers have the right. Also, you cannot treat both of them equally. You're either with the pornographers, and you're going to destroy our young minds, or you're with the children, and you're going to tell the pornographers, stay out of our schools, stay off of our public airways. What you want to do, you can do that in privacy, because that's what America's about. You can do something, that we have our privacy, we have our freedoms. Now, my students would ask me all the time, they would say, well, Miss Foster, you're not very tolerant. And I said, well, probably not, because when I was growing up, you know, we had the red light district. And you better not let any of your neighbors see you there and to get back to your parents that you were in the red light district. That's where the prostitutes, the whores, and everyone else that wanted to sell their wares, their wicked ways, that was their area. But now they're right next door. They're right there in our children's faces, right there on newsstands when they leave our classrooms, when they walk home from school. The newspapers, big pictures, naked men and women. It's kind of funny. My girlfriend and I were laughing. We were talking about this the other day when we were in school. One time we ditched class because one of our friends found this book in her dad's drawer of a naked man and woman, and we were going to sneak to look at this. Children today don't have to sneak to do it at all. All kind of sex is all old hat to them. Naked men and women, that's nothing to them. Those are the changes that have occurred, and I blame the 60s for a lot of that. 1962 Act that took God out of our schools, and a number of other things that happened in the 60s. Now, surely there were some good things, but I would say that most of what's happened in the 60s, and those who have gained leadership role, like the couple in the White House, are bringing America to her knees. And it's up to us to stand tall, to remember the guts and the fighting spirit of our forefathers, and to do that. Now, when I appear on predominantly black talk shows, I love it. Oh, I just love it. They don't always like it, but I love it. And I want to share some of the thoughts that come over there. These are young people, probably in their 30s. As a matter of fact, I had a conversation with a very prominent woman, 39, just last week. And she was telling me how She had gone to Georgetown University from 1976 to 1980, I think she said. We were talking about affirmative action, and she said, you know, there were 20 blacks there at the time. 8 of us were allowed in because of our grades and because of our record. The other 12 were let in because of affirmative action, and what that means is you get certain added points because you are a minority. So they give you so many points for your grades, for your SAT tests and so forth, and then so many points because you happen to be a minority, and so that the other 12 dropped out long before that. It is very wrong what we're doing to our children with affirmative action. It is very, very wrong. Now, 40s and 50s, most of our young children think there were no blacks going to major universities. They overlook the fact that Jackie Robinson was going to UCLA. And not to mention Jackie, these are popular people, Paul Robinson and all of these people had gone to major universities. Many of our young children think prior to the 1960s blacks couldn't vote nowhere in America. The tales that are told in celebration of Black history in some of these schools' assemblies are all about the evil ways of whites in America. And they go back to the days of colored and white-only drinking fountains. Well, my story is a little bit different because I was one who grew up with these white and colored drinking fountains. And I remember as young children today leave high school after class, they may stop by the mall and window shop or whatever. Well, we used to go downtown to the big store. And we're high school students. We would go and drink out of the white fountain, and some of the sales clerks would say, now you know you're supposed to drink the colored water. And we'd say, well, if we wanted colored water, we'd drink Kool-Aid. And everybody would laugh. And even the sales clerks would sniggle because they knew the law was wrong. Many people knew it was wrong. But it wasn't. The kids today, our children really think that if we didn't drink from that particular fountain, we were lynched. I applaud Rosa Parks, but there were many black women who didn't get up and give their seats away. I know. I was on some of those buses. There are a number of stories that are not being told. You have groups that are calling for black reparations for slavery. We've answered the question of slavery with the Civil War and 2 amendments to our Constitution. It's time to get over it, and it's time to move forward. Why is all of this happening? Because power and money, and also to distort the history is to accumulate this power and this money. Because there's something about slavery that's not being told to our young children. That even uneducated slaves recognized the importance of capitalism. That there were some slaves who were able to work and buy themselves out of slavery. In fact, there's very good work by Juliet Butler, Walker, I believe it is, from the University of Chicago, who wrote about this, who wrote about her own grandfather, Frank McWhirter, who bought himself and 16 family members out of slavery. But what the black leaders do, they use Marcus Garvey to talk against capitalism, but Marcus Garvey himself is quoted as saying, with all the ills of capitalism, because with capitalism it allows for both slavery and freedom. But with all of the ills, it is the best system there is. Just as America is the best nation there is. And rather than telling our children they belong to Africa, we need to tell them they are Americans first and foremost. This is our land. That is what they need to know. Have you ever seen any of these gangsters? I had the opportunity a couple of weeks ago to speak to a business and professional group of black women. There were about 300 of them there, and I was brought on to on a panel debate on affirmative action. And as I began to talk, I mentioned the same thing to them that I just said to you. And I said to them, you know, every time you see these gangsters on television talking about why they got into gangs, what is the first thing they say is the reason? I want to belong. I wanted to belong. How in the world are they ever going to feel they belong to America if we're telling them they belong and their loyalty should be to some other nation or continent? Well, when I said that, I didn't realize that there was a former gang member that they were about to honor, and they had had a great reception for him the night before. And they looked at me really kind of wild-eyed, but he stood up and he gave me applause. And they began to receive me a little bit better. And when it was over with, he came over and he said, you know, I never realized what you just said, how true it is when it hit me. I have never heard anyone speak with a love for this country like you are speaking today. And afterwards, as the people came up to say or give greetings or comments to us, most of the ladies could hardly let go of my hand, thanking me for these comments. These are not popular words to say when you're in the black community because of the black leadership. They have an agenda. Farrakhan has told us he wants a separate state. Most people, that just goes over their head. They don't even think twice about it. I remember when Senator Hayakawa had sent me an article from a San Francisco newspaper about why worry about Farrakhan. And he had put a little poster note on it, and he said, Ezola, I do worry. Well, I worry too, and I tell you why. Farrakhan really was not on the scene very much until Jackson brought him into prominence during the '84 elections. Now, some people knew a little about him because when his lieutenants walked in and blew Malcolm X away, many people blamed Farrakhan, and he snickingly sometimes say, well, I may have influenced them. He never admits it one way or the other. But then, in 1984, Farrakhan made the statement, there's going to be a race war in America and young black gang members will be used. A few months later, in early '85, Libya's Gaddafi gave Farrakhan $5 million. Since that time, he's been buying out convention centers and forums across America to sprue his hatred. Cassettes. My husband's grandfather, in his late 80s, who we thought was conservative most of his life, would sit and listen to those tapes, and his whole attitude changed about America and about his love for this country. Farrakhan's a very powerful speaker. Now, as the New American pointed out in their coverage of Carl Rowan's book, The Coming Race War in America, it doesn't matter whether there were 400,000 or a million. There were enough there for a very fine army to start a war. The last riots in '92, there were gang loads of gangsters going from one area to another, starting fires. Of course, when the FBI investigated, they talked with the gang members and they didn't set any fires, some investigation. After the riots of '92, Maxine Waters paraded the Crips and Bloods throughout the Congress for funding. They received billions of dollars. What are they doing with it? Every week they go to her unemployment training center and pick up $100. They say they need that to catch a bus to go look for a job the next week. It's ridiculous. Farrakhan is not the only one who's telling us what they plan to do to America. All of our enemies tell us what they're going to do to us. Why do we have to wait until we're backed up in a corner for us to wake up? It's happened over and over again. And our young students really blame America for World War II. It's our fault, imperialist America. That is what's going on with this multicultural curriculum in our school. And that is why there is so much hostility and disdain for this great nation of ours. The illiteracy rate is down. It hasn't gone up since all of that money has come in. It's gone down. So, what does the Biller administration want to do about that? Devise another test. Test too hard? Let's come up with another one. They're planning now to even get rid of the SAT altogether. This is very dangerous, folks. And I will say to you, the vast majority of black Americans are Christian, God-loving, Bible-reading people who do love America, who do want the best for their children. But they cannot speak out because of this power that's over them. Every time I'm on television or radio, I get calls thanking me from people in the community, not just in my community there. And in my community, listen, they used to come with us to press conferences and so forth. Everyone that would show up suffered. They or their families suffered the wrath of these groups. And so we just stopped doing it because it was too dangerous for them. We were firebombed, our house set on fire, and our son was so brutally attacked, hospitalized. All of these things happen to you. It's not easy to speak out. I just didn't have enough sense to stop speaking out. But some of them did. You know. Now, when you think about all this, you have to wonder, gee, is there any hope in sight? There is. These teachers' unions are very, very devastating for public school education. And I'll give you an example of this, just how powerful they are from my own experience and what happened to me, why I am no longer in the teaching profession. Last Memorial Day, I was featured on PBS NewsHour with Jim Lair on the issue of the Gallagher Amendment. It was the Gallagher Amendment to the immigration bill that was pending at that time. I was on with Congressman Elton Gallagher from California and Javier Becerra, and also a local school board member. And I talked about illegal immigration being the reason that the schools were overcrowded, the fact that our American children were treated as second-class citizens, and I went on and on and on. Well, I work at a school that is overcrowded because of illegal immigration. And because it is overcrowded, we are on what's called a year-round schedule, which means that I work 4 months and then I'm off 2 months. My students and I take the 2-month vacation and then we go back for the 4 months. Well, we were all on vacation on Memorial Day because I'm off May and June. A teacher faxed me a copy of a piece of hate mail that was placed in every teacher's mailbox, referencing the show and calling me a liar, a racist, and a Nazi. I told you I've been called everything in the book, a Nazi of all things. Well, I got in touch with the superintendent and the principal. I said, listen, I'll be returning there in a month or so. What are you going to do about this? Not that I expected anything, because the hate mail came from the teachers' union and the each school now, they're so powerful, the teachers' union there in Los Angeles, that each school in the district is controlled by what's called school-based management council. Now, if you don't have that in your schools, it's coming. And here's how it works. The union representative and the principal are co-chairs of the committee, and they supposedly are running things at the school. School-based management put out the hate mail on me. So naturally, I didn't expect them to do anything about it. When I returned to school on July 1st, my first day, I walked on campus, and I noticed I was treated quite coolly by many of the teachers, some of whom had sat and had coffee with me just 2 months earlier, would look the other way, wouldn't even speak. We started the school day with a faculty meeting. I walk in, everywhere I sit, they'd get up and move. Thought I had the plague or something. Well, I knew that something like this was going to happen when the superintendent and the principal ignored me. And I don't take too kindly to being ignored, so we already had called a press conference right after that faculty meeting. And sure enough, it was all over the news that night, so that really made them even angrier with me. The next morning, I walk on campus, and there's a Latino man standing there passing out flyers, and as I enter the campus with another teacher, he sneers at me and flings his arm in front of me to give the flyer to the other teacher. When I get to the mailbox, mine is in my mailbox. It was a flyer from the Progressive Labor Party of the Communist Party here in America. Communism is alive and well in Los Angeles schools, believe me. And on this flyer, they mention in bold print that teacher Ezola is a racist and should not teach at this school or any other school. By the end of the day, some of my students were coming to me in tears, saying, "Miss Foster, other teachers are telling their students you're a racist, and when we try to tell them you're not, they tell us, oh, you must like a racist, you must be a racist too." And it was just terrible. They were getting in near fist fights with other students. So the next day when I came to school, no, at the end of that day, this was my second day back, at the end of that day, actually I was police escorted off campus, and that was my last day back. So you see, in our public schools, unless you're politically correct, you keep your mouth shut. One of the administrators told me, the only way you can stay in this district is to find a conservative school. Well, there is no such in that district. Or keep your mouth shut. So I know that there's no way that I will be going back. As a matter of fact, a First Amendment rights lawsuit was filed against the school district on my behalf just about a month or so ago. So we do intend to pursue it. And when you hear people talk about the teachers' unions, just like the school boards, the teachers' unions have their little special interest groups. They have their gay and lesbian commission who push all of these programs. And of course, I knew it was a matter of time before they got rid of me, because I was always fighting with them. A year or so earlier, the teachers' union representative was teaching government and social studies, and she showed her students a film called The Wrath of Grapes. This was a film put out by Cesar Chavez to encourage people to boycott grapes there. And the teacher told the students that if they joined a boycott and protest in front of the local market that Saturday, that she would give them credit, class credit. Well, the students always come to me. I have a rapport with the students. That's another thing that bothered them, because the students and I got along just great. Never had any problems with the students until, of course, this happened. So I stopped it. Once the students told me, I said, "This is illegal. You cannot do this." Well, you know now how they've gotten around that? Demanding community service from the students. And again, if it's not a mandate in your schools that before your child can graduate from that public school, they will have to perform a community service, it's coming too. So once they find out that you block them, they then find a way to go around it. I blocked them on that, and then another time, I had appeared on a show. It was one of these crazy shows about should homosexuals have the right to marry and raise children. And they had a lesbian couple on, and then they had a homosexual couple on, and they had me and a member of Campus Crusade on. We, of course, were the opposing voices. And the students saw me on the show. And so the next day, Early morning, before class started, the first thing they said, Foster, is that really the way you feel about homosexuality? And I said, of course. They said, well, what about Project 10, which is what I just explained to you? Because Project 10 is active on our campus. And I explained to them how I felt about Project 10. A couple of days later, the director of Project 10 came into my classroom, said he wanted to talk with me. I said, fine. I was headed out the door thinking we were going to have a little private conversation outside the door, but he stopped me in the middle of my class, and he began, well, I understand you said this and thus and so about Project 10. I said, yes, that's correct. I said that, and I'll tell you what else I said. And I went on to give him my full opinion. And when he hightailed it out of there, the students applauded. And I said, what is all this about? And they said, Miss Foster, in his classroom, where we have to go for our math class, he has these pictures and posters of half-naked men in sexually alluring positions. And the girls would complain how they were so embarrassed, and the boys would giggle, but they said they were embarrassed too. And I said, well, have you told your parents? Oh, our parents don't really believe it. Well, actually, a lot of them, their parents, because they're illegal, they really don't want to make any waves and want to speak out. I said, have you gone to the principal or other teachers? Yes. They just said nothing, wouldn't do anything. So I went to the principal, and sure enough, he said, it's not your business. You stick to your subject. And I said, oh, okay. And I had the media come out. The posters came down in a hurry. They came down. And the funny thing was, on the media was a Spanish-speaking lady, and I couldn't understand what she was saying, but I could hear Miss Foster, Miss Foster, Miss Foster, and her daughter came over and she said, Miss Foster, she said, if it weren't for you, we'd have to look at all that filth and smut in our classrooms. And I said, oh, great, that's what she's saying, huh? Normally they're saying other things about me, I don't know. But it was great. But this is what's happening now. The Gay and Lesbian Commission is very powerful on our schools, campuses, through the teachers' union and the school boards. And so that is why the teaching of homosexuality is so widespread in our public schools. That's why you're having all of these programs. And it's not just each group has its own agenda that they're promoting through our schools. And at the beginning of this school year, 3 of our schools have been told they have to change their mascot because the Indian Education Commission decided that Braves, Warriors, Indian names were offensive. And so the schools have to now change their mascot. I think some of these people they're such busybodies, they really don't know what to ask for, but they have all of this power and they have all of this money. They're well organized. And they're the enemies of our children. And yet, they want more time with our children. We have now what's called Healthy Start in our schools. And if it's not here, again, it's coming. You're told because of crime, we need to open up the schools so that the children can be there longer. I tell you, the children are not that well supervised during the school day. Can you imagine in the afternoons and evenings? There are many, many problems that's going on in our schools. We are the answer. You must realize what's happening. And when you read about a teacher who has taken a stand, support that teacher. If you read of a policeman, just like Michael knew, the military man, when you find one that's strong enough to stand up, they need your support. Very, very much so. Many of the parents there are just overwhelmed because your PTA and your advisory councils, they are what I call professional parents. Some of them have been in the position 20 years, 25 years, knowing they don't have any children in school, and they're getting paid. They're like lobbyists. The Parent Advisory Council came about again after the rise of 65. The McCone Commission again said, well, parents need to be more involved in the school. You know, that really sounds good, but you better be very, very careful about what that means. My mom, I don't think she came to school except when I was in a performance or maybe parent conference night or something, but that was it. She wouldn't have known whether or not they were teaching me, except that when I went home, I would help read some of her business papers that she couldn't understand, or help her figure out some of the bills and doing arithmetic and that kind of thing. Otherwise, she really didn't know. And many of these parents are trusting in the school to do the job that the parents think that they are doing. But with the Parent Advisory Council, what happened was parents were paid $25 every time they came to the school for a meeting. Now, most of the parents didn't know about this, and the looter I told you about that's running the parents of Watts, she knew about it because she was working along with Maxine, and she knew that she could get this money, and so people of her ilk were paid to come in. You know, I've been away from that school for almost 30 years. She's still active there. I think she owns 5 homes now in the community. That government, you know, that money that you're paying for education, you'd be shocked as to how it's really spent. And I know I had filed complaints against the misuse of funds and the abuse of programs in the schools. It went all the way up to the Inspector General, and they investigated, and they asked the parents, why would you spend $48,000 to go to Palm Springs for a weekend conference sponsored by the NAACP on how to teach the black child? Now, you know, our children are not from outer space. The way you teach them is the way you teach any other child. You use the correct methods. The parents responded, well, we had to go there to get this information. And the investigator says, well, why couldn't you come to the school for this meeting? And that $48,000 could go to supplies for our children. School, they replied. School is too dangerous. But their children attend there. In my book, I talk about being dangerous to the cause. It is because I know the cause of these groups. I marched with them. I've rubbed elbows with them. They know me and I know them. And their cause is not our cause. And that is what we should be cognizant of. We must recognize who are our friends and who are our enemies, and then proceed from there. And I am really sorry there's not enough time for me to answer questions, because I know that I leave a lot of questions on your mind. That means you'll have to have me come back. But I do want you to know that if you need a question answered, and if I don't have time to do it tonight, please contact me. I'd love to answer your questions. And I just want to say this in closing. All of us must come together to fight this battle, because we are fighting for the hearts and minds of our children. We're fighting for the soul of America. We're fighting some people who are well-financed, not just with our tax dollars, but by our own enemies. Cuba, Libya, Syria, all of these, Iran, support these organizations. If not just through Jackson and Farrakhan, they do give them enough money so that it filters out to all the groups. And unfortunately, that's what it's all about. And I just want you to be alert as to what's in the future in terms of my next battle. In my book, you're going to see a picture of a Catholic church in Maurice, Louisiana. That is where I was born. My grandfather I say all the time that he must have gotten his 40 acres and a mule, because I think my family owned about all of the Negro section of the town. And as we were growing up there was only one church there. It was a big Catholic church. I would say downtown, but I don't know. The town is so small, there's only one stoplight. But anyway, we'd all go to this church, and blacks would sit in the back, and we'd wait until all the whites got communion, and then we'd go and get our communion. But after church, people ask me, why is it I don't feel the hatred of so many others? Because as a child, I didn't understand what I saw in church. But I did see, as we all walked out of church, I would see blacks and whites hugging and talking and children playing, and it was as though we had just come out of a twilight zone, so to speak, because it was altogether different. But the strength of Negro men was such that my grandfather brought the men together, and he says, I'll donate the land. We'll build our own church. And that is the church that you will see in the book. October 19, we will be celebrating the 50th anniversary of the church. And when I talked with my cousins back there a couple of weeks ago, and I asked them, what are the plans? Oh, well, the bishop is coming to speak. And I said, is that all? Yes. Well, I got to work, and I contacted Louisiana Governor Mike Foster. I contacted the congressman from the district, Chris John, and I said to them, here is a church built by Negroes, for Negroes, great historical value, and I think that a proclamation is due. They agreed. The problem is the word Negro. They said, well, you know, we have to put African American. I said, no, you don't. My grandfather was not an African American, and the men who built that church in that town were not African Americans. And if they were living today, they would not want to be called that. We want true history, not made-up history. So we want it true. Well, I just let them know that 2 days before I left to come here, so I can imagine all the messages waiting for me when I return home. But keep us in your prayers, because we want all of America to know our true history. When we celebrate black history, we're celebrating the time when we had soul music and soul food. Today, black history, you have the African drums, which is foreign to most of us. You have African cuisine, which most of us know little about. And I won't even go into Kwanzaa. I've told some of my friends earlier today how that came about, how they just make up a culture for us. It's just insane. There is only one culture that should be taught in our American public schools, and that's American culture. And it's for all of our children. Now, I really am going to close. In closing, I want to say this. My husband and I have come in contact with many organizations over the 10-plus years that we have been out here fighting this battle. We've been asked to join a number of them. And then we were invited to Utah to speak to a group there. It happened to be a bircher who put the presentation together. And as most of you birchers do, he started giving us literature, all these nice books to read, the law and so forth. And then I spoke to the groups in Northern California, and I met so many wonderful, knowledgeable people, and I read the books, and we were sold. And I will say this to you. We joined the Birch Society because it is the most informed group of people and the most active group of people, the most patriotic group of people, and the finest group of people we've ever met. We are so happy to be proud members of the John Birch Society, and we intend to promote it all over. Thank you very much. Love you a lot. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.